I'm Amelia Hayes, 32, and 2 weeks ago I stood in the rain watching them lower my grandfather's casket into the ground. That's when I heard my cousin Robert whisper to my uncle, "Now we finally get what's rightfully ours." They didn't know Grandfather William, the publishing magnate everyone respected, had left me his entire estate and controlling interest in Hayes Publishing. Now my family has arranged a reunion weekend at the estate to discuss the inheritance situation. I should have known they weren't planning a discussion, they were planning a heist. Before I tell you what happened at that family weekend, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happened when my family's plot crashed headlong into Boston's most prestigious literary event. The tires of my beat-up Honda Civic crunched over the immaculate gravel driveway of Hayes Manor as I pulled up to the sprawling New England estate. The three-story colonial mansion with its white columns and perfectly manicured grounds had always intimidated me despite spending many summers here as a child. Now as the new owner, I felt like an imposter approaching my own inheritance. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, memories washing over me. Grandfather William had been the only one who believed in me. While my parents constantly reminded me that writing isn't a real career, Grandfather would sit with me for hours in his study discussing literature. He'd read my stories with genuine interest, offering thoughtful feedback instead of dismissive criticism. "You have the Hayes storytelling gene, Amelia," he would say, his blue eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Now he was gone, and I was about to face a family who had made it clear over the years that I was the disappointing Hayes, the one who refused to join the family business, choosing instead to pursue an impractical writing career that had yielded only modest success. Benjamin, the estate caretaker who had served my grandfather for over 30 years, appeared at my car window with an umbrella, startling me from my thoughts. "Miss Amelia, welcome home," he said, opening my door. The way he said home made my eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Thank you, Benjamin," I replied, stepping out and accepting his umbrella. "Are they all here already?" "Yes, miss. Arrived yesterday. They're waiting in the main parlor." Of course they were. The vultures had probably been circling before the funeral ended. As Benjamin led me through the grand entryway, I mentally prepared myself for the confrontation ahead. The family hierarchy was well established. At the top was Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, who had always acted as the family matriarch even when her parents were alive. Her husband, Uncle Gerald, had served as grandfather's CFO at Hayes Publishing for decades. Their son Robert, my cousin, was a vice president at the company who had expected to inherit the reins. His wife Sophia, a former model, had married into the family with clear social climbing intentions. Then there was Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother and the family lawyer who had handled all Hayes legal matters for years. And of course, there would be an empty space where my parents should have been, Catherine and James Hayes, who died in a car accident 5 years ago. I straightened my shoulders and followed Benjamin into the parlor. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me with expressions ranging from false sympathy to poorly concealed hostility. Amelia, darling Aunt Patricia, rose from her seat, her tall, thin frame draped in expensive black cashmere. We were beginning to worry. She air-kissed both my cheeks, her signature Chanel No. 5 perfume suffocating me momentarily. "Traffic from Boston," I explained, simply accepting the glass of water Benjamin offered, while refusing Uncle Gerald's offer of something stronger. "Well, now that we're all here," Uncle Thomas said, clearing his throat and pulling out a folder of legal documents, "I think it's time we discuss the specifics of William's will." My stomach tightened. Here it comes. As you all know, Thomas continued adjusting his glasses. Father's will was quite unexpected. He glanced at me. "Amelia, as the primary beneficiary, you inherit the family estate, including this property, and 51% ownership of Hayes Publishing." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the room. Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Sophia was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Aunt Patricia's expression remained carefully neutral, but her eyes had hardened to steel. "There must be some mistake," Robert finally said, his voice tight. "Grandfather wouldn't leave controlling interest to someone who knows nothing about publishing." "It's no mistake," Thomas replied, glancing uncomfortably at Patricia. Father was very clear about his wishes. "Amelia," Aunt Patricia said, her voice honeyed with false concern. "Surely you understand this puts you in a difficult position. Running a publishing house requires business acumen, industry connections, which you don't have," Robert interjected bluntly. Robert Gerald warned, though his expression suggested he agreed. Patricia leaned forward, placing her hand over mine in a gesture that felt more possessive than comforting. "Darling, we're thinking of you. The responsibility would be overwhelming. Robert has been groomed for this position his entire life." "What my mother is suggesting," Robert said, his tone condescending, "is that the sensible thing would be for you to sell your shares to me. You'd still be wealthy, but without the burden of running a company you know nothing about." I withdrew my hand from Patricia's grasp. "I've only just learned about the inheritance. I need time to process everything." "Of course," Patricia smiled tightly. "That's why we planned this family weekend, to help you understand the situation and make the right decision." The way she emphasized right decision sent a chill down my spine. "Dinner is served," Benjamin announced from the doorway, providing a momentary reprieve. Conversation during dinner was tense, filled with reminiscences about grandfather that somehow all led back to Robert's qualifications to run the company. By the time dessert was served, the message was clear: they expected me to sign away my inheritance, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. As I excused myself to go to bed, claiming exhaustion from the drive, Aunt Patricia caught my arm in the hallway. "Amelia," she said quietly, "we're family. We want what's best for everyone. I hope by Sunday you'll have come to the right conclusion." Her fingers dug into my arm slightly before releasing me. "The paperwork is already prepared. All you need to do is sign." I nodded noncommittally and headed upstairs, the weight of their expectations and thinly veiled threats following me like a shadow. The next morning I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, giving me an opportunity to explore without my family's watchful eyes. I made my way to grandfather's study, a room that had always been my safe haven during childhood visits. The study remained untouched since his death. Leather-bound books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. His antique mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface meticulously organized even in his absence. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, remembering how he would let me sit in his chair when I was young, pretending I was a famous author signing books. Behind the desk was a portrait of my grandfather, serious, distinguished, but with that hint of warmth in his eyes that few people ever noticed. Below it hung a smaller photo of my parents and me at my college graduation, the last picture taken before their accident. "I don't know what to do," I whispered to their images. I began opening desk drawers, searching for anything that might help me understand why grandfather had made me his heir. In the bottom drawer, I found a stack of leather-bound journals, my grandfather's diaries. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but my need for answers outweighed my guilt. The most recent journal contained entries from the months before his death. I flipped through pages filled with his elegant handwriting, stopping when a passage caught my eye. March 15. Another discrepancy in the quarterly reports. Gerald continues to insist it's an accounting error, but this marks the third error I've found this year. All directing funds to the same offshore accounts. I've asked for a discreet audit without his knowledge. Patricia will be furious if she discovers what I suspect, but I cannot ignore the evidence mounting before me. My heart raced. Was Uncle Gerald embezzling from the company? I flipped forward several pages. April 2. The auditor confirmed my suspicions. Funds have been systematically diverted for years. The question remains, is Gerald acting alone? Thomas prepared all the legal documentation for these transactions. And Patricia has always been involved in major financial decisions. I fear this corruption runs deeper than I initially suspected. I've scheduled a meeting with Margaret to discuss restructuring the company leadership. Margaret Chen, I recognize the name. She was a legendary editor and publisher who had been my grandfather's closest friend and business associate for decades. I continued reading, finding more entries about his growing suspicions and plans to confront the family. The final entry was dated just 1 week before his unexpected heart attack. May 10. I've made my decision. I've instructed Thomas to revise my will. Amelia will inherit controlling interest. She's the only one I trust to restore integrity to the Hayes name. Patricia and Gerald will be furious, but I've arranged for Margaret to mentor her. I only hope I have enough time to prepare her properly. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me hastily return the journal to its drawer. Seconds later, the study door opened, and Aunt Patricia appeared. "There you are," she said with a tight smile. "Exploring your inheritance already?" "Just reminiscing," I replied, moving away from the desk. She entered the room, her eyes scanning every surface as if inventorying valuables. "Your grandfather was very traditional in many ways. I think he sometimes forgot we're in the 21st century where women can be more than just wives or mothers." The statement was so hypocritical coming from her, a woman who had ruthlessly climbed the corporate ladder, that I almost laughed. "He believed women could be whatever they wanted," I countered. "Yes, well," she waved dismissively. "He also believed in fairy tales and happy endings. That's why he published them. Reality is harsher, Amelia. Publishing is cutthroat. Without the right connections, the right experience." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. "I'm a quick learner." Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We're having a family breakfast in 30 minutes. Do join us. We have so much to discuss." After she left, I found myself drawn to the window, gazing out at the estate grounds. Through an open window somewhere below, voices drifted up. I recognized Patricia and Gerald talking in hushed but heated tones. "She's been in his study," Patricia was saying. "Did you check if anything was missing?" "Everything's in place," Gerald replied. "The journals are still there, but I doubt she'd understand what she was looking at even if she read them." "We can't take that chance. We need to move quickly. She has to sign by Sunday or everything we've worked for is at risk." "And if she refuses?" There was a pause before Patricia responded, her voice hard with determination. "She'll sign by Sunday or she'll regret it. The girl has no idea what she's gotten herself into." I stepped away from the window, my heart pounding. Their words confirmed what I had just read and suggested they were willing to go to extreme lengths to get what they wanted. When I returned to my room to change for breakfast, I immediately noticed something was wrong. My suitcase had been moved slightly, and the manuscript pages I'd brought with me, chapters from my novel in progress, had been disturbed. Someone had searched my room while I was in the study. At breakfast, I tried to act normal while observing my family with new suspicion. Robert kept checking his phone nervously. Sophia watched me with calculation in her eyes. Uncle Thomas avoided eye contact entirely. After breakfast, I encountered Robert in the hallway. When I confronted him about someone searching my room, his denial was too quick, too rehearsed. "You're being paranoid, Amelia," he said with a dismissive laugh. "Why would anyone search your room?" "You tell me." His expression hardened. "Look, this situation is difficult for everyone. Grandfather made a mistake, but we can fix it. Don't make things harder than they need to be." "Is that a threat?" "A word of advice. Things happen in this family. Accidents, misunderstandings." He stepped closer. "Remember what happened to your parents." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me frozen in the hallway, his words echoing in my mind. Was he implying what I thought he was? Later that afternoon, I sought out Benjamin, finding him tending to the garden. After ensuring we were alone, I asked Benjamin, "Did my grandfather say anything unusual to you before he died?" The old caretaker looked around cautiously before responding. "Mr. Hayes was troubled in his final weeks, miss. He changed his will just 1 month before his passing, said it was time to clean house. Do you think his heart attack was natural? Benjamin's weathered face grew solemn. I've worked for this family for 30 years, Miss Amelia. I've learned that with the Hayes family, very little happens by chance. As dusk fell, I returned to my room to find a folded piece of paper that had been slid under my door. With trembling hands, I opened it to read a message written in unfamiliar handwriting. They did the same thing to your parents. The next morning, I entered the dining room to find my family already seated for breakfast, their conversation halting abruptly at my appearance. The tension was palpable as Benjamin served coffee and pastries. Amelia, Uncle Thomas said, patting the empty chair beside him. Join us. I've brought some simplified paperwork for you to review. I took the seat, noticing how they had positioned themselves around the table, Thomas on one side, Patricia on the other, with Gerald and Robert directly across from me. A perfect ambush formation. Thomas slid a folder toward me. I've condensed the legal documents to make things easier. The transfer of shares is straightforward. You'll still receive substantial compensation, of course. I opened the folder and scanned the first page, which was filled with dense legal language, despite Thomas's claim of simplification. I'll need time to read everything carefully. Of course, Patricia said, though her tone suggested impatience. But we'd hope to resolve this matter before the weekend ends. For closure, for everyone's peace of mind, Gerald added, his gaze intense. I sipped my coffee, buying time. I'd like to explore the grounds today, for nostalgic reasons. Robert scoffed, but Patricia shot him a warning glance. What a lovely idea, she said, with manufactured enthusiasm. The gardens are beautiful this time of year. After breakfast, I escaped the suffocating atmosphere of the house, wandering the expansive grounds with my mind racing. The estate encompassed 20 acres of land, including manicured gardens, a small apple orchard, and a pond where I used to feed ducks with my grandfather. Near the pond stood the old boathouse, now rarely used, but once a favorite spot during childhood summers. Inside, dusty shelves still held framed family photos from happier times. I picked up one showing my parents and me at a family 4th of July celebration. I must have been about 10 years old, laughing as my father attempted to grill hamburgers while my mother teased him about his cooking skills. They had been so full of life, so loving. Their death in a car accident 5 years ago had devastated me. The official report stated brake failure was the cause, a tragic mechanical error. But now, with everything I was discovering, I couldn't help but wonder if there had been nothing accidental about it. My parents had always been the odd ones out in the Hayes family. My father had chosen to teach literature at Boston University rather than join the family business, and my mother, a children's book illustrator, had encouraged my creative pursuits. They had lived modestly in Cambridge, rejecting the lavish lifestyle embraced by Patricia and Thomas. Had they discovered what grandfather eventually found out about the embezzlement? Had they paid the ultimate price for that knowledge? On impulse, I made my way back to the main house and up to my parents' old bedroom. Patricia had converted most of the family bedrooms into guest rooms over the years, but for some reason my parents' room had been preserved almost as a museum piece. Their personal items had been removed, but the furniture and decor remained unchanged. I ran my hand along the antique dresser, remembering how my mother would sit here to brush her hair each night. On a whim, I pulled open the bottom drawer, our old hiding spot for secret notes when I was young. To my shock, there was a sealed envelope inside, addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened it to find a letter dated just 2 weeks before their deaths. My dearest Amelia, if you're reading this, something has happened to your father and me. I pray that's not the case, but we've discovered something disturbing about Patricia and Gerald's business practices. Your father confronted them yesterday, and the conversation turned ugly. They threatened us, Amelia. We've gathered evidence of financial improprieties spanning years. Tomorrow, we're meeting with grandfather to show him what we've found. I'm leaving this letter just in case. If anything happens to us, don't trust them. Any of them. All our love, Mom. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. This confirmed my worst fears. My parents' death had been no accident. They had been murdered to cover up the embezzlement scheme, and now the same people were targeting me. I needed help. Using my phone, I texted my childhood friend Rachel Morgan, now an investigative journalist with the Boston Globe. Rach, I need your help. I'm at Hayes Manor. My family is trying to force me to sign away my inheritance, and I think they may have murdered my parents. Can you look into Hayes Publishing financial records and my parents' accident? Her reply came quickly. Oh my God, Amelia, stay safe. I'm on it. We'll call you with what I find. That evening dinner was an excruciating affair. Each family member tried different tactics to persuade me to sign the papers. Robert emphasized my lack of business experience. Sophia talked about all the things I could do with the money, travel right without financial worry. Thomas stressed the legal complexities I'd face trying to run a company. Uncle Gerald, who had remained relatively quiet until now, finally spoke. Amelia, your grandfather was not thinking clearly in his final months. He became paranoid, suspicious of everyone. Not everyone, I countered. Just those who were stealing from him. The table fell silent. Patricia's wineglass paused halfway to her lips. What exactly are you implying? She asked, her voice dangerously soft. I found grandfather's journals. And my mother's letter. The color drained from Gerald's face. Robert's expression hardened. I don't know what you think you found, Patricia said carefully, but William was declining mentally. Imagining conspiracies. It was quite sad, really. Sad enough that you had to murder my parents when they discovered what you were doing. Patricia's mask slipped, her eyes flashing with rage before she composed herself. You're overwrought, dear. Grief does strange things to the mind. Sign the papers, Amelia. Gerald said, his voice cold. Take the money and walk away, or I promise you we'll make sure you end up with nothing. The next morning, Robert informed me that several Hayes Publishing executives were coming to the estate for a meeting. They'll explain why your control would be disastrous for the company, he said smugly. Maybe you'll believe them since you clearly don't trust family. The executives arrived at 10 o'clock, 3 men and 1 woman, all in immaculate business attire. They greeted Patricia, Gerald, and Robert with the familiar warmth of longtime associates, but regarded me with barely disguised skepticism. We gathered in grandfather's study, which had been arranged like a boardroom. I sat at one end of the table, conspicuously isolated, while everyone else clustered at the opposite end. Martin Reynolds, the chief operating officer, began the presentation. Ms. Hayes, we've prepared projections to demonstrate the company's trajectory under various leadership scenarios. The slides showed catastrophic financial predictions if I maintained control, plummeting stock values, mass author departures, and eventual bankruptcy. By contrast with Robert at the helm, the company would apparently thrive beyond all previous success. As you can see, Robert concluded, your leadership would devastate not just the company but the livelihoods of over 300 employees. I studied the documents they had provided. Despite my supposed lack of business acumen, something seemed off about the numbers. Sales projections didn't align with the market trends I'd researched the night before. Author retention rates contradicted what I knew about the loyalty grandfather had cultivated with key writers. These projections seem inconsistent with industry reports I noted, pointing to specific discrepancies. Martin shifted uncomfortably. These are internal numbers accounting for unique factors. Like the offshore accounts where company funds have been diverted for years. The room went still. Patricia's smile froze on her face. I don't know what you're talking about, Gerald said sharply. I think you do. Grandfather discovered the embezzlement shortly before his death. That's why he changed his will. That's preposterous, Robert sputtered. Grandfather was losing his mental faculties. I turned to the executives. Did any of you notice unusual financial transfers requiring multiple authorizations? Payments to shell companies, perhaps. The woman executive whose name tag identified her as Diane Walsh, CFO, avoided eye contact. She knew something. "We should adjourn for now," Patricia announced abruptly. "Our family needs to have a private discussion." After the executives departed, I found myself alone with Uncle Gerald in the study. His typical polished demeanor had cracked, revealing barely controlled anger beneath. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed. "No idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I replied, gathering my courage. "Thieves who killed my parents and possibly my grandfather when they discovered your scheme." Gerald's face contorted with rage. "Your parents couldn't prove anything either, and look what happened to them." The moment the words left his mouth, he seemed to realize his mistake. My blood ran cold. "So you admit it?" "I admit nothing," he snapped. "But heed this warning, Amelia. Accidents can happen to anyone." Before I could respond, Patricia swept into the room. "Wonderful news, Brandon is joining us for dinner." I stared at her in shock. Brandon was my boyfriend of 8 months, a fellow writer I'd met at a literary conference. I hadn't told him about the inheritance or invited him to the estate. I took the liberty of calling him Patricia, explained, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Family should stick together during difficult times, and since you two are serious, he's practically family." The implication was clear. They had enlisted Brandon to help persuade me. But how had they even known about him? We'd been keeping our relationship relatively private. Brandon arrived that afternoon, greeting me with a kiss that felt somehow performative. Throughout the evening, I noticed how easily he fit in with my family, laughing at Gerald's jokes, engaging Robert in discussions about business, complimenting Patricia on her taste in art. He seemed less like my boyfriend and more like their ally. After dinner, while the family enjoyed drinks in the parlor, I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I slipped into the adjacent library where I could overhear Robert and Brandon talking through the partially open connecting door. "She's stubborn," Brandon was saying, "but I've been planting the ideas like you suggested, making her doubt her writing abilities, suggesting she'd be happier with financial security than creative success." "Good," Robert replied. "Tomorrow's our last chance. If she doesn't sign by then, we'll have to move to more decisive measures." "You promised me a publishing deal," Brandon reminded him. "My manuscript frontlist promotion? And you'll get it once she signs. Patricia has connections throughout the industry. Defy her and you'll never publish anywhere worth mentioning." I retreated silently, my heart breaking. Brandon's recent criticisms of my work suddenly made sense. His suggestions that I might not have what it takes to succeed as a writer, his comments about how financial security would free me to find my real passion. He'd been undermining my confidence, deliberately setting me up to surrender my inheritance. When I returned to the parlor, I forced myself to smile to pretend I hadn't discovered yet another betrayal. I had to play along until I could figure out my next move. The stakes were higher than I'd realized. They weren't just after my inheritance. They would destroy anyone who stood in their way. Early the next morning, I slipped out of the house before anyone else was awake. Benjamin had arranged a taxi to take me into town, where I'd agreed to meet Rachel at a small cafe far from any Hayes family haunts. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. Rachel was already there, her laptop open and a stack of folders beside her coffee cup. Her face lit up when she saw me, but her smile quickly faded as she took in my appearance. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, giving me a quick hug. "It's been a rough weekend," I replied, dropping into the chair across from her. "What did you find?" Rachel glanced around before sliding a folder across the table. "The financial records are damning, Amelia. Over the past decade, approximately $22 million has been funneled through a series of shell companies ultimately controlled by Gerald and Patricia Hayes." I flipped through the documents, noting highlighted transactions and annotated bank statements. "How did you get this?" "I have sources at the SEC. They've had Hayes Publishing on their radar for years, but couldn't build a solid case without an insider." Your grandfather was starting to cooperate with them before he died. And my parents' accident. Rachel's expression turned grim. I pulled the police report and spoke to the mechanic who examined the car. The brake lines were definitely cut clean, precise cuts that couldn't have been caused by road debris or wear. But the police investigator who signed off on the accident conclusion was Detective Wilson, whose son mysteriously received a full scholarship to Princeton the following semester. Funded by a Hayes Family Educational Foundation, I guessed. Exactly. Rachel hesitated. Amelia, there's more. I looked into your grandfather's death too. The official cause was heart attack, but the timing is suspicious. No autopsy was performed because Thomas's family lawyer waived it. Said your grandfather wouldn't have wanted one. I sat back absorbing this information. They killed them all, and now they're after me. You need to go to the police. With what circumstantial evidence and suspicions, they own half the officials in Boston. Then get out of there. Come stay with me until we can figure this out. I shook my head. If I run, I lose everything grandfather wanted me to have, everything my parents died for. The bell above the cafe door jingled. I looked up expecting to see another customer, but instead found myself staring at an elegant Asian woman in her 70s. Diana, I gasped, recognizing my grandfather's longtime personal assistant. Diana Miles approached our table, her posture perfect as always. Amelia, I heard you were in town. She glanced at Rachel. Miss Morgan, I presume. The journalist. Rachel nodded, looking surprised. May I join you? Diana asked, already pulling out a chair. Once seated, she lowered her voice. I've been trying to contact you since the funeral, but Patricia informed the company that all communications with you should go through her. Of course she did, I muttered. Your grandfather suspected what was happening, Diana continued. In the months before his death, he gathered evidence against Patricia and Gerald. He was planning to confront them the week he died. Do you think they killed him? Diana's eyes filled with tears. William had a heart condition, but he was careful with his medication. The night before he died, Patricia insisted on bringing him his evening tea. The next morning he was gone. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I promised him I would help you if anything happened to him. She reached into her handbag and extracted a small flash drive. This contains everything William compiled: financial records, emails, recorded conversations. He made a copy for safekeeping. I took the flash drive, feeling its weight in my palm like a lifeline. There's something else, Diana added. Margaret Chen has been asking about you. She was William's closest friend and confidant. The editor, I remember her from industry events. She knows what Patricia and Gerald have been doing. She's been gathering her own evidence for years. A plan began forming in my mind. There's a literary gala in Boston tomorrow night. Margaret always attends. And Patricia always ensures the Hayes family has a prominent table, Diana confirmed. They've been trying to keep me from attending. Now I understand why. Rachel closed her laptop. So what's the plan? I need to get back before they realize I'm gone. Then I need to review this evidence and figure out how to use it. When I returned to the estate, I pretended to consider the family's offer while secretly reviewing the evidence on the flash drive. The files confirmed everything: years of systematic embezzlement, all implemented through legal documents prepared by Uncle Thomas and financial transactions authorized by Gerald. That evening, I found Brandon searching my room when I returned from dinner. He froze when he saw me, a drawer half open in his hands. Looking for something? I asked coldly. He straightened, attempting to look casual. I was just looking for a pen. In my underwear drawer. Brandon sighed, dropping the pretense. Amelia, this doesn't have to be complicated. Just sign the papers. Take the money. We could travel, live anywhere. You could write without financial pressure. While you enjoy your publishing deal with Hayes. The one Patricia promised you. His expression confirmed my suspicions. You heard that. Every word. Look, it's just business. Your family approached me months ago before we even met. They knew you were vulnerable after your last breakup. They orchestrated our chance meeting at that conference. The revelation felt like a physical blow. Our entire relationship was a setup. At first, yes, he admitted. But I do care about you, Amelia. I'm trying to protect you. These people are dangerous. And you're what? A hired manipulator, a gigolo. I'm a writer who wants a career. Hayes Publishing can make that happen. Or they can blacklist me across the industry. He stepped closer. Just sign the papers. We can make this work. I forced myself to calm down to think strategically. If I revealed my plans now, they would stop me from attending the gala. I needed to play along. I'll think about it, I said finally. You're right, maybe taking the money is the smart choice. Relief washed over Brandon's face. He believed me, you won't regret it. But as he pulled me into a hug, I made a silent promise to myself. They would all regret underestimating Amelia Hayes. We're having a small dinner party tonight, Patricia announced the next morning, as I entered the dining room for breakfast. Just a few important contacts from the publishing world. A chance for you to meet some key people before you make your final decision. Her tone suggested this was a generous gesture on her part, but her eyes told a different story. This was another trap. How thoughtful, I replied, matching her false warmth. I'd love to meet them. Throughout the day, the house was a flurry of activity as staff prepared for the evening's event. Fresh flowers arrived, caterers bustled in and out of the kitchen, and Patricia supervised every detail with military precision. Meanwhile, I kept up the pretense of wavering on my decision, even allowing Brandon to think his manipulations were working. By evening, the manor was transformed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, silver serving trays gleamed, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive candles. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress, applying minimal makeup and pulling my hair into a conservative bun. If they wanted to portray me as unsophisticated, I wouldn't give them ammunition with an ostentatious appearance. As guests began to arrive, I quickly realized the true purpose of the dinner. The important contacts included Philip Weston, a notorious literary critic who had savaged my first published short story collection, James Harrington, CEO of Pinnacle Publishing, Hayes' most cutthroat competitor, and several influential industry figures who owed their careers to Patricia's patronage. This wasn't a networking opportunity, it was a public execution. Patricia orchestrated the seating to ensure I was surrounded by her allies. Throughout dinner, the conversation repeatedly turned to topics designed to highlight my inexperience and unsuitability to run Hayes Publishing. The industry is changing so rapidly, Harrington commented, swirling his wine. Digital rights management alone requires specialized knowledge that takes years to develop. Absolutely, Patricia agreed before turning to me with feigned concern. Amelia primarily writes fiction, don't you, dear? The business side must seem so overwhelming. Before I could respond, Philip Weston chimed in. I remember your collection, Shadows on Glass. Wasn't it showed promise but lacked discipline? Common among young writers. I smiled tightly. Thank you for your feedback, Mr. Weston. Grandfather always said critics are essential to the ecosystem, like vultures cleaning up the literary landscape. A few guests choked on their wine and Patricia's smile froze on her face. As the evening progressed, I maintained my composure, responding to provocations with calm dignity while observing the dynamics around me. I noticed how Robert kept glancing nervously at his watch, how Uncle Thomas seemed increasingly uncomfortable, and how Brandon was drinking heavily, avoiding my gaze. During a lull in the conversation, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I passed the study, I overheard Robert and Uncle Thomas in heated discussion. The paperwork is ready, Robert was asking. Everything's prepared, Thomas confirmed. Once she signs over the shares, we file the additional documents, declaring her mentally unfit to manage her personal affairs due to emotional instability following her grandfather's death. The psychological evaluation is already completed. And the affidavit from Brandon, signed this morning. His testimony about her erratic behavior and paranoid delusions is quite convincing. With Patricia as her legal guardian, will have complete control. I froze my hand, covering my mouth to stifle a gasp. They weren't just after my inheritance, they planned to have me declared incompetent, stripping me of all legal rights. When I returned to the dining room, a glass of wine awaited me. I lifted it to my lips but noticed an unusual shimmer in the liquid and Brandon watching me intently. Pretending to sip, I set the glass down, certain now that they had drugged my wine to ensure I would behave erratically, providing evidence for their claims of mental instability. Later, as I felt increasingly lightheaded despite not drinking the wine, I realized they must have also tampered with my food. The room began to tilt slightly, my thoughts becoming fuzzy around the edges. Patricia watched me with calculated interest, waiting for me to fall apart publicly. Benjamin, who had been serving dessert, noticed my distress. He leaned down while placing a plate before me and whispered, "Don't eat or drink anything more, Miss Amelia. I'll help you excuse yourself soon." 20 minutes later, Benjamin announced that an urgent call had come for me. I followed him out, steadying myself against the wall as the drugged food took effect. "They put something in your meal," Benjamin confirmed once we were alone. "I saw Mr. Robert slip something to the caterer." "I need to lie down," I murmured, the room spinning around me. Benjamin helped me to my room where I collapsed on the bed. "Lock your door, miss," he advised. "I'll check on you later." I must have fallen asleep because I woke to the sound of my doorknob turning. The lock held, but then came a soft scratching noise, someone picking the lock. Groggily, I pulled myself up, searching for a weapon, and finding only a heavy crystal paperweight on the nightstand. The door swung open slowly. A dark figure slipped inside, moving toward my bed. I gripped the paperweight, pretending to be asleep until the intruder was close enough. Then I swung with all my strength. The figure dodged and the paperweight hit their shoulder rather than their head. A masculine grunt of pain told me it was likely Robert or Brandon. I scrambled off the bed, still disoriented from the drugs but functioning on pure adrenaline. "Stay away from me," I shouted, backing toward the window. The intruder lunged forward. I dodged, throwing a lamp in their path, gaining precious seconds to wrench open the window. Cold night air rushed in as I climbed onto the window ledge, calculating the distance to the trellis, a few feet away, my childhood escape route. Behind me, the intruder cursed. I jumped, grabbing the trellis and scrambling down as quickly as my drug-addled coordination would allow. Above me, a head poked out of the window, but in the darkness, I couldn't make out who it was. I dropped the last few feet to the ground and ran into the shadows of the garden, heart pounding, knowing that my time at Hayes Manor had come to a dangerous end. I spent the night hidden in the old groundskeeper's cottage at the far edge of the property, where Benjamin brought me blankets and food once the house had quieted. "Who was in my room?" I asked. "I couldn't tell for certain," Benjamin replied, "but Mr. Brandon was missing from the parlor for some time and returned looking agitated." The betrayal stung, even though I should have expected it. "I need to get to the Boston Literary Gala tonight," I told him. "Can you help me?" At dawn, a cream-colored envelope was slipped under the cottage door, an invitation to the Boston Literary Gala addressed to me. Benjamin explained that it had arrived at the main house the previous day, but Patricia had intercepted it. When I returned to the manor to prepare, Patricia was waiting in the foyer. "There you are," she said, her voice brittle. "We were concerned when you disappeared last night." "Too much wine, perhaps?" "I needed some fresh air," I replied vaguely. "Well, you should rest today. You look terrible." Her gaze fell to the invitation in my hand. "What's that?" "An invitation to the Boston Literary Gala tonight." Patricia's smile tightened. "Oh, darling, you can't possibly attend. It's for senior industry figures, not aspiring writers. Besides, we're having a family meeting this evening to finalize the paperwork." "I'm going," I stated firmly. Robert appeared from the library. Absolutely not. The family meeting takes precedence. I'm the head of Hayes Publishing now, I reminded them. My place is at the Gala. You haven't signed the papers yet, Patricia hissed, dropping all pretense of affection. This little power trip of yours ends tonight. I turned to leave, but Gerald stepped into my path. You're not going anywhere, Amelia. For your own good, you'll stay here today. I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. Through the window, I could see Robert instructing the security guard to watch the driveway. They had essentially placed me under house arrest. At 4 o'clock, Benjamin knocked on my door with tea. The family is gathered in the library, miss, he whispered. Now's your chance. Rachel is waiting at the end of the service road with clothes for the gala. With Benjamin's help, I slipped out through a servant's passage and ran through the wooded area at the edge of the property. Rachel was waiting in her car as promised, engine running. You look like hell, she said as I collapsed into the passenger seat. Drug dinner and attempted assault will do that to a girl. Rachel handed me a garment bag. Diana sent this for you, said you'd understand. Inside was a stunning midnight blue gown, a classic design that my mother had worn to literary events years ago. Diana must have preserved it all this time. We drove to Rachel's apartment where I showered and prepared for the evening. As Rachel helped style my hair, I filled her in on everything that had happened. You realize you're basically walking into the lion's den, she warned. The Hayes family has allies throughout the industry. But so did my grandfather, I reminded her. And Margaret Chen will be there. The Boston Literary Gala was held at the historic Fairmont Copley Plaza, its grand ballroom transformed into a glittering showcase of literary power and prestige. As Rachel and I entered, heads turned. I recognized many faces from industry magazines and events editors, agents, best-selling authors, and publishing executives. There she is, Rachel murmured, nodding toward an elegant woman in a red cheongsam holding court near the center of the room. Margaret Chen, legendary editor and my grandfather's oldest friend. Before I could approach her, Robert appeared, blocking my path. He had clearly rushed to the gala when he discovered I was missing. What do you think you're doing? He demanded, gripping my arm painfully. You need to leave, now. Take your hand off me, I replied loud enough that nearby guests turned to look. You're making a scene, he hissed. No, you are. I pulled away from him, and everyone is watching. Robert glanced around, suddenly aware of the attention we were attracting. Several prominent authors were frowning at his aggressive behavior. This isn't over, he threatened before stalking away. Margaret Chen approached, her expression curious. You must be Amelia. You look remarkably like your mother. Miss Chen, I need to speak with you urgently. I've been hoping you would contact me, she replied. Come, my table is more private. As we made our way across the room, I noticed Rachel speaking intently with a professional-looking woman in a tailored suit. They both glanced in my direction. At Margaret's table, I found Diana already seated. The older women exchanged knowing looks as I joined them. William was concerned about you, Margaret began. He wanted me to mentor you to help you navigate the company after he was gone. Did you know what Patricia and Gerald were doing? I suspected. William confided his concerns shortly before his death. We were gathering evidence. She lowered her voice. The company's financial records showed irregularities, but we needed inside proof. I have it, I told her, producing the flash drive Diana had given me. Grandfather's records plus additional evidence about my parents' death. Margaret's eyes widened. Your parents, I always wondered. James had contacted me about financial discrepancies just weeks before the accident. They were murdered, I confirmed. Just like grandfather. We need to take this to the authorities, Margaret said. But not just any authorities. Patricia has too many connections. At that moment, Rachel appeared with the woman I had noticed earlier. Amelia, this is Detective Laura Wilson. She specializes in financial crimes. Miss Hayes, the detective greeted me. Miss Morgan has been sharing some very interesting information about Hayes Publishing. I'd like to hear your side of the story. For the next hour, I shared everything with Detective Wilson, the embezzlement, the threats, the evidence of murder. She listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. This flash drive contains everything you need, I concluded, handing it over. Detective Wilson nodded. This completes our case. We've been investigating Hayes Publishing for years, but could never get enough evidence to move forward. Your grandfather's records are the missing piece. What happens now? I asked. We'll need your formal statement, but we have enough to obtain warrants for financial records and arrests. As we were speaking, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Robert had returned, clearly intoxicated and belligerent. He was loudly denouncing me to anyone who would listen. She's unstable. Paranoid grandfather never meant to leave her in charge. We have psychiatric evaluations to prove it. The room fell silent as he stormed toward our table, face contorted with rage. You think you've won. You think these people will support you. They need us. The Hayes family built this industry in Boston. Robert, I said quietly, aware of all eyes on us. You're embarrassing yourself. You're nothing, he shouted. A talentless hack who couldn't make it on her own merit. The only reason you have anything is because grandfather was going senile. Margaret stood, her voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. William Hayes was my dearest friend for 40 years, and his mind was sharper than yours has ever been, young man. He chose Amelia because he knew exactly what you and your parents were doing to his company. Several publishing board members who had witnessed the outburst approached our table. One of them, an older gentleman I recognized as the board chairman, addressed me. Miss Hayes, I believe we should schedule an emergency board meeting. Your cousin's behavior tonight has been illuminating. Robert looked around suddenly, realizing how badly he had overplayed his hand. The literary community was witnessing his meltdown, and the carefully cultivated Hayes family image was crumbling before their eyes. As Robert retreated, Margaret took the stage where the evening's presentations were to take place. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with our scheduled program, I'd like to announce a special award in memory of William Hayes, whose contribution to literature and publishing in Boston has been unparalleled. And I'd like to invite his granddaughter Amelia Hayes to accept it on his behalf. As I made my way to the stage, I felt my grandfather's presence guiding me. This was his world, and he had trusted me to carry on his legacy. Standing before the assembled literary elite of Boston, I found my voice as a Hayes at last. I returned to Hayes Manor after midnight, accompanied by Detective Wilson, Margaret, Diana, and Rachel. Benjamin opened the door, his eyes widening at the sight of my entourage. They're waiting in the library, miss, he informed me. They've been agitated since Mr. Robert returned. Indeed, as we approached the library, I could hear raised voices. Patricia was berating Robert for his public display at the gala. You fool, do you have any idea what you've done? Decades of careful planning ruined by your drunken tantrum. When we entered, the family fell silent. Patricia stood by the fireplace, Gerald beside her. Thomas sat in an armchair looking defeated. Brandon lingered awkwardly by the window while Sophia paced nervously. Patricia's eyes narrowed at the sight of Detective Wilson. Who is this? Detective Laura Wilson, Boston Police Financial Crimes Unit. Wilson replied, showing her badge. I'm here at Miss Hayes's request. This is a family matter, Gerald said dismissively. Whatever Amelia has told you is fully supported by evidence, Wilson interrupted, including William Hayes' personal records of your embezzlement scheme. Patricia's composure faltered momentarily before she rallied. Ridiculous. William was becoming paranoid in his old age. Any evidence he collected was the product of his declining mental state. The SEC disagrees, Wilson replied. As does the forensic accountant who has been reviewing Hayes Publishing's books for the past year. Thomas paled visibly. A year. William Hayes contacted authorities 7 months before his death, Margaret explained. He suspected something was wrong but wanted proof before confronting the family. Gerald turned on Thomas. You said the investigation was closed. It was. Thomas stammered. I was assured. You were assured by people who had been fed selective information, Wilson said. The real investigation continued. Patricia's eyes flashed dangerously as she turned to me. You ungrateful girl, everything we did was for this family, for the Hayes legacy. You stole from the company I countered. You had my parents murdered when they discovered it, and then you killed grandfather when he figured it out too. You can't prove any of that, she hissed. Actually, we have evidence linking Gerald to the mechanic who tampered with James and Catherine Hayes' car, Wilson said, and we're exhuming William Hayes' body for toxicology tests. Panic flickered across Patricia's face. She glanced at Gerald, who had gone ashen. Now, I said, walking to my grandfather's desk and sitting in his chair, I believe you wanted me to sign some papers. I've brought some of my own instead. Resignation letters for each of you effective immediately with agreements to repay all stolen funds and cooperate with the investigation. You can't be serious, Robert sputtered. Deadly serious, I replied. Sign and I might be persuaded to ask for leniency. Refuse and I'll ensure the prosecutors seek maximum sentences. Thomas was the first to break. I'll sign. I'll cooperate. His shoulders slumped. I never wanted anyone hurt. I just prepared the paperwork. You knew what they were doing, I said coldly. Yes, he admitted. But I didn't know they would kill your parents. Or William. I swear it. Robert looked between his parents, panic in his eyes. Mother, tell her this is absurd. Tell her we didn't. Shut up, Robert, Patricia snapped. She straightened her spine, looking down at me with contempt. You think you've won. You think you can run Hayes Publishing. You're nothing but a mediocre writer living in your grandfather's shadow. Maybe, I acknowledged. But I'm not a thief or a murderer. Everything I did was necessary for this family, Patricia seethed. Your parents were weak, sentimental fools who would have destroyed what generations of Hayes built. And you're just like them. Gerald placed a restraining hand on Patricia's arm. Enough, Patricia. She shook him off. No, I won't be lectured by this girl. I built Hayes Publishing into what it is today. William was too focused on literary merit to see the business opportunities. We would have gone bankrupt if I hadn't stepped in. By stealing millions, Margaret challenged. By making necessary adjustments, Patricia shouted. William was happy to take the profits without asking questions until James started poking around. Your father always was self-righteous, Amelia, just like you. As Patricia ranted, I noticed Brandon edging toward the door. Going somewhere, Brandon. He froze. Amelia, I can explain. Save it for your statement to the police, I cut him off. I'm sure they'll be interested in your role in all this. I never knew about the murders. I swear, he insisted, eyes wide with fear. I was just supposed to get close to you, convince you to sign. That's all. And search my room. Drug my food, break in while I was sleeping. Brandon paled. That wasn't me. I swear it. Liar, Robert spat. You were supposed to get the flash drive. You said you would handle it. I looked for it, but I couldn't find it. While they argued, I noticed Patricia slipping something from the desk drawer, my grandfather's antique letter opener, its blade glinting in the firelight. Enough of this farce, she declared, her voice deadly quiet. She raised the letter opener and lunged toward me with surprising speed for a woman her age. Several things happened at once. Detective Wilson drew her weapon. Rachel screamed. And Benjamin, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, intercepted Patricia, grabbing her wrist and twisting until the letter opener clattered to the floor. Patricia let out an inhuman shriek of rage, fighting against Benjamin's grip. You stupid girl, do you know what I sacrificed for this family? What I endured? Everything I did was for the Hayes name. No, I said, standing my ground, as Wilson handcuffed a now sobbing Patricia. Everything you did was for yourself. Grandfather knew that in the end. That's why he chose me. As Detective Wilson called for backup and began the formal arrest process, I stepped out of the library needing a moment alone. I found myself drawn to my grandfather's study once more, to the portrait that had watched over the room for decades. "I hope I'm doing right by you," I whispered to his image. For a moment in the quiet of the study, I could almost hear his reply, "You already have, Amelia, you already have." 1 year later, I stood in the newly renovated lobby of Hayes Publishing, now adorned with a bronze plaque dedicated to my grandfather and parents. The company had weathered the scandal surprisingly well, thanks in large part to Margaret Chen's guidance and the loyalty of authors who appreciated our renewed commitment to literary excellence over commercial shortcuts. The past year had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, corporate restructuring, and personal healing. Patricia, Gerald, and Robert had been arrested that night at Hayes Manor. The evidence against them proved overwhelming once investigators began digging. Gerald had turned state's evidence, providing details about the embezzlement scheme and confirming what I had long suspected: he and Patricia had ordered the tampering with my parents' car brakes after discovering they were gathering evidence of financial fraud. His testimony also confirmed that Patricia had poisoned my grandfather's medication the night before his fatal heart attack. Patricia received consecutive life sentences for the murders of my parents and grandfather. Gerald, despite his cooperation, was sentenced to 25 years for his role in the deaths and the embezzlement. Robert received 15 years for conspiracy and financial crimes. Uncle Thomas had indeed made a deal with prosecutors. His testimony against the others, combined with his lesser role in the scheme, resulted in a 5-year sentence, most of which would be served under house arrest. He had surrendered his law license and was now working on a memoir about the case. His advance would go entirely to a victims' compensation fund. Brandon's literary aspirations had evaporated after the scandal broke. No publisher would touch him after the story of his betrayal spread through the literary community. Last I heard, he was working at his father's insurance agency in Cleveland, his manuscript permanently shelved. Sophia had divorced Robert shortly after his arrest and quickly remarried a real estate developer in Florida, distancing herself from the Hayes name and scandal. Hayes Manor itself had been transformed. No longer a private residence, it now served as a writer's retreat for emerging voices, hosting workshops, residencies, and literary events. Benjamin continued as the estate manager, his loyalty rewarded with a generous salary and a cottage on the grounds. Diana had become my chief of staff at Hayes, publishing her institutional knowledge and fierce loyalty proving invaluable during the transition. Rachel's exposé on the Hayes family scandal had won her a prestigious journalism award and launched her career as an investigative reporter. Margaret Chen had been my mentor throughout, guiding me through the intricacies of the publishing industry while respecting my vision for the company's future. Under our joint leadership, Hayes Publishing had refocused on literary fiction while expanding thoughtfully into digital markets and audio content. Most meaningful to me was the James and Catherine Hayes Memorial Foundation, which I had established to support young writers from underrepresented backgrounds. The foundation operated from my parents' former home in Cambridge, which I had purchased back and restored to its original state. As for my own writing, the novel I had been struggling with before all this began had finally taken shape, a story about family betrayal, inheritance, and finding one's voice amid loss. The early reviews were the strongest of my career, with critics noting a new depth and confidence in my work. I sat in my grandfather's study, my study now looking at the old family photo on the desk. It showed all of us at a company picnic decades ago, before greed and resentment had poisoned everything. My parents smiled at the camera, my father's arm around my mother's waist. Grandfather stood tall and proud. Even Patricia and Gerald looked happy, Robert a toddler between them. What had happened to change them? When had money and power become more important than family? I would never fully understand, but I had made peace with that uncertainty. The intercom buzzed. Diana's voice came through. "Your 4 o'clock is here, Amelia." "Send them in," I replied. A young woman entered clutching a manuscript nervously. Another emerging writer seeking publication, the lifeblood of what we did. I smiled, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Tell me about your story," I said. As she began to speak, I felt a sense of rightness wash over me. This was the inheritance my grandfather had truly left me, not just a company or an estate, but a purpose. A chance to nurture new voices, just as he had once nurtured mine. The path to this moment had been paved with betrayal and loss, but it had led me to where I was meant to be. I had lost the family I thought I had, but I had built something new, a family of loyal friends and colleagues bound by shared values rather than blood. In the end, I realized that my true inheritance wasn't the money or the company. It was finding my voice and my truth, and that was something no one could ever take from me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories of family betrayal and triumph. Don't forget to share with someone who might need to hear that standing your ground can lead to better things. Until next time, remember that your voice matters, and sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into.